Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Feet on the Street Fighting Contamination Across Ohio webinar. This is part of our In Your Community webinar series. My name is Dave Folks with Ohio EPA's Division of Environmental and Financial Assistance. I will be moderating this morning's session with the Recycling Partnership. Our presenter will be Jill Barton, Director of Community Programs with the Recycling Partnership. We also have the rest of our Recycling and Litter Prevention Grant Program behind the scenes, ready to help address and answer any specific grant questions that are submitted during the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Jill Martin of the Recycling Partnership. Jill?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dave, and thank you, Ohio EPA, for inviting me to the webinar this morning with this audience. I'm really excited to present our Feet on the Street campaign, as well as the specific Feet on the Street projects that we did in Ohio. Before I get us kicked off, I just want to share a little bit as I was reflecting this morning about our core values at the Recycling Partnership. We hope to live by our core values on a daily basis, and I was looking at these thinking about this project, and I really truly believe there's a few that stand out. And one is partnership is part of our name for a reason. I think this project is a good indication of how partners really came together to make this happen. Another one that I saw, pursue growth and learning, is one of our core values, and I definitely think these projects that I'm going to share with you today are all about pursuing growth and learning in the recycling industry and how we apply those to future projects. And one of my favorite, have fun. I'm reflecting back on this project, and I definitely had a really good time and had fun while doing it. So those are the three that stood out, but we hope to live by our core values on a daily basis. So I just wanted to share that with you all. And let's see if I can advance. There we go. Just a snapshot of who the Recycling Partnership is funded by. We take private and public dollars to advance the mission of recycling across the country. And you'll see here, there's a number of stakeholders and companies across the supply chain, and we take those dollars and funds to communities across the country to advance recycling. So that's a quick snapshot of who we are funded by. And our good work has reached over 60% of the US population so far with our best management practices, our tools and resources. But with that being said, still only half of Americans can recycle at home as easily as they can throw something away. So that's where the problem is. As well as people that can recycle easily are only recycling half of what they actually could. So that's our mission, to fix that. And each day we work together with communities and companies to help families recycle better and recycle well. And how do we do that? We do it through three major pillars of work. First, we improve access to recycling. But again, like I said before, just by providing access doesn't mean you're actually capturing everything. So we also focus on increasing the capture of recycling in those carts and bins at the curb. And more and more importantly, we've been spending a lot of time on improving quality of recycling that residents set out. And that's what this Ohio program is all about. Here's a quick snapshot of communities that we've worked in across the country. We've done statewide initiatives across the West Coast, as well as Ohio and Tennessee, New Mexico, and Minnesota, but we also work with individual communities across the country. We've reached over 1 million households so far, over 2,000 communities. And this is an outdated slide because we've placed over 1 million new recycling carts at residents' homes to improve that access. This is one of my favorite slides because I think we really need to put this in perspective when we think about the recycling system and the challenges we're all facing in recycling. Healthy recycling really needs a system approach. What I mean by that is there's not one entity or one stakeholder that's going to solve our challenges when it comes to recycling. It needs a system approach. It needs to involve consumers and the MRFs and the brand owners and the community. And our job at the Recycling Partnership is to pull those stakeholders together to really advance the system and fix some of the challenges we're facing. And I believe there may be a poll. So let's get our, well, I was going to say our pencils ready, but I think it's just clicking. So Dave, if you could pull up the first poll for us.
Oh.
All right, here it is. What is the average inbound recycling contamination rate in your community solid waste district or authority? Less than 10%, between 10 and 20%, greater than 20%, or you have absolutely no idea? All right, let's see. So we've got between, wow, we've got a few bright spots. The less than 10%, I'm going to call those our bright spots. 28% between 10 and 20. Greater than 20%, 36. Wow. And then I have no idea. All right, wonderful. So let's dig in a little deeper here. The good news is for those ones that ranked fairly high, you're not alone. That's the good news. We see well over 20% contamination rates across the country. And we know that contamination rates cost the system money and time and safety hazards for workers. So there's lots of challenges that come with high contamination rates. And we see them all over, well over 20%, some reaching 50 and 60%. But the good news is we saw some of those bright spots. A few of you had less than 10% inbound contamination rates. And why I call those the bright spots is because that's what we look for at the Recycling Partnership. And that's what we've looked for in the past so that we can replicate the good work and those bright spots in other communities. We used to be able, this slide used to just have California and Oregon and Washington results here because that's where we found those bright spots. But the good news is after our work in Ohio these last couple of years, we've seen a couple of communities approaching that 10% or less rate. So we've got Akron that estimated based on the feet on the street results is anticipated to be a little less than 15%. Centerville, 11%, and Fairfield, 12%. So these are incredible numbers. I'm going to dig in a little bit about how they got there and where they started from. So a quick refresh about the Ohio and the Recycling Partnership relationship in this program. So in 2018, the Recycling Partnership applied for a special assistance grant from Ohio EPA. It was a 2-year project, supposed to end in October of 2020, but COVID hit and we extended another year and it just wrapped up last month. So this is kind of wrapping a bow around all of the results at this point. There was a $320,000 grant with $80,000 of matching funds. Our goal was to target 4 MRF sheds. We wanted to work in 4 different MRF sheds within the state and hit and impact 155,000 households. And when we set out, we thought that was going to be about 2 to 4 communities. And in the end, we wanted to create a video sharing with other Ohio communities the impacts of what we've learned and a customized toolkit that I'll share a little bit later. So our objectives of the Recycling Quality Improvement Program was to reduce contamination by 25 to 35%. So that's our goal here. And I just explained why that's so important because we all know contamination costs the MRF money, it costs the community money, there's safety concerns, there's lots of problems with contamination. So our goal was to reduce it by 25 to 35%. Another goal we had was to really engage and involve all the stakeholders in the contamination challenge. Again, going back to that systems thinking. The problem that we're faced with is going to take a systems thinking solution. So all the stakeholders have to have a hand in fixing that problem. So there's no silver bullet that one entity is going to be able to solve on their own. And ultimately build a roadmap for future granting initiatives. The goal wasn't just to pick a certain number of communities and see the successes, but really build upon the successes and the learnings so other Ohio communities can follow in their footsteps and build off that. So reduce contamination, engage and involve stakeholders, and build a roadmap for the future for Ohio. So here's a snapshot of what we were out to do. we wanted those 4 MRF sheds. We actually ended up in 3 MRF sheds. We worked in the waste management Akron facility, the Rumpke facility in Columbus, and the Rumpke facility in Cincinnati. Our target was 4 communities at 155,000 households, but we actually worked in 6 communities and almost reaching that 150,000 households. And I feel like this worked out a lot better, allowing us to see successes in small, medium, and large communities. So before we thought we'd hit just 4 communities and they'd be larger in scale, but we actually had a cross section with Centerville having 2,000 households and Fairfield with almost 12,000. But then we also worked in larger cities like Akron and Columbus, Cincinnati. So we had a wide range. Oh, and this is my stakeholder slide. So I'll just let this sink in. And because you're all on mute, I can't hear all the laughter, but this is my stakeholder slide. This is a diverse set of stakeholders we worked with. But really, in all honesty, here are our stakeholders that we worked with. Ohio EPA was the funding agency. We were the ones that we needed to grant and execute the work. Then we had Rumpke and Waste Management being the MRFs. And then you see the whole logo soup there with our solid waste districts and authorities and the communities that we worked in. This is just a snapshot of the outcomes. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but we did 2 phases. Phase 1, you'll see that we had Centerville, Fairfield, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Akron. And then in phase 2, what we did is said, okay, we know this works. You can see some of the reduction numbers here. We know that the feet on the street works, but what can we do to tweak and learn a little bit more? And so we added some learnings and some tweaks to phase 2, and we did programs in Akron, Cincinnati, and Gahanna in phase 2. And I'm going to dig into a little bit more about what that looks like. But you'll see some really good reduction numbers. And before I dig in, let me just explain exactly what the project was. We're going to talk a lot about outcomes, but what is this project and how do we get it done? We keep referring to Feet on the Street. So what Feet on the Street is, it's a contamination reduction program that really takes education and operations and combines those 2 things to reduce contamination. And what I mean by that is we send out info cards to every resident. Then we send out a crew to inspect households' recycling carts 4 consecutive times, at a minimum 4 consecutive times, week after week. And we provide direct feedback on whether that cart was clean or whether it was contaminated. And so that's the tags you see there on that slide. We provide that direct feedback. Then halfway through the campaign, we are sending out another top issue mailer. So if we know that plastic bags was the #1 thing we're seeing at the curb, we would send out a top issue mailer to every resident to remind them not to put plastic bags in their recycling. And we measure. So we are very proud and a big proponent of measurement and metrics. So we measure the results. That's kind of a nutshell of Feet on the Street. And I'm going to share some of the outcomes here. But at the end, the toolkit that we discussed really has the step-by-step process on how to conduct Feet on the Street and what I mean by each of those steps. But let's dig into how Akron did it. I love this slide. Jackie on the left, she is the project manager for Keep Akron Beautiful. She was the grantee in this case, but worked heavily with the city to get this project done. So this was conducted, the first round of tagging was conducted June through August of 2019. Some quick stats about their program. They have weekly collection, 44,000 households, but at that time, the city collected 33,000 households, and then they had a private collector collect 11,000 households. So in our target area, in round 1, we just focused on the city collected routes of 33,000 households. What's unique about Akron is that they offer a $2.50 discount if you sign up to get a recycling cart. And if you got that recycling cart, you get $2.50 discount off your trash bill every month. So what they knew is that inherently encouraged some people to get a recycling cart and not necessarily have the intention of doing recycling properly, but rather just get that financial discount. And this program, you'll see in the next slide, helped alleviate that and address that concern. So their contamination rate started at almost 40%, and it was on an incline. It was going up 14% over the previous 2 years. So they were approaching some serious contamination challenges. They have about 8,500 tons a year. Like I said, we did 4 inspections at every single household over 3 phases. Because it was a large area, we broke it into various phases. And they wanted impact right away. So they didn't want to warn residents, hey, you might have something wrong, like please correct it. They didn't warn, they just rejected service right away. If they saw something wrong with the cart, they tagged it and they said, we're not going to pick it up until it's cleaned up. So talking about those, that $2.50 discount, what they were able to find is those people that continually contaminated their cart week after week, they ended up having an address list and being able to go to those households and pull the carts from service. It happened to be a very small subset of the overall 33,000 households. They ended up pulling 500 carts from service, saving themselves $15,000 a year in subsidies, where that resident had no intention of recycling properly. Now, if they wanted to get that cart back, they had to go through the Department of Public Works and request the cart back, as well as get some education involved before they got their cart back. And a number of communities do different things. They may make you take a webinar. They may have you do a quiz. There's a number of educational tools available that residents would have to go through to actually get their cart back. But let's look at the contamination results. So they started at about, like I said, 40%. In this table here, it's 39%. After Feet on the Street, it was at 28%. So their contamination reduction was 28% relative reduction. Another question a lot of communities have is, how long does this last? If you do this Feet on the Street program and it's a 4 or 8 week program, you know, how long do those good results last? How long will my contamination rate remain low? Well, we don't necessarily have all the answers to that, but in this case, Akron monitored that well after the program ended. So 11 months after the Feet on the Street program ended, they were still seeing a decline in their contamination rate, and it went down from 28% to 26%. And then 17 months after that program, it went down again to 21%. So a continual decline well after Feet on the Street was over. We were really excited to see that. It doesn't come just miraculously, it does come with work. So they continued their social media campaign, they continued education and outreach, they pulled those carts from service that I described. All of that led to the continual decline of contamination. So then they knew it was a success. I'm going to back up a slide really quick. So they ended at 21%, right? We did Feet on the Street, they did all this education, and they got it down to 21%. But what they really wanted to get below is 15%. Their goal was to get their contamination rate below 15%, so they conducted another Feet on the Street program. So we did that actually 2 years after the first program. Again, 4 inspections, 3 phases. Goal was to get below that 15%. And they removed, at this time, they removed the $2.50 discount altogether to get that $2.50 discount that a resident would receive if they signed up for recycling. Another quick metric that we have here is the tagging occurrences. We not only monitor inbound contamination before and after the program, but how many carts are being contaminated is also a metric that we use. And we call that the tagging occurrences, how many residents got a tag. And you'll see that in Akron, phase 1, 2, and 3, they started at 26% on phase 1. That means 26% of the carts set out for recycling had something wrong with them. And then at the end of the program, that was 15%. So you'll see those tagging occurrences going down over time. Again, another way of measuring success through the Feet on the Street program. So this is just a depiction of exactly what I said. We had tagging, Feet on the Street 1.0 and 2.0, big results. Like I said, they had almost 40% contamination rate. We are now estimating about 15%. The final results are not in yet, but based on the feedback they're getting at their MRF, we're looking to be about 15%. So we reached the goal that we're aiming for. All right, let's quick talk about Cincinnati. Cincinnati tagging 1.0. Again, they did two projects in Cincinnati. The first project was about 28,000 households out of the 83,000 households that they have in the city. So we didn't do the whole city. We did about 28,000 households. They have every other week recycling collection. So we did 5 inspections because they warned. They didn't want to reject service right away. So if there was a contaminated cart at the curb, they wanted to let the resident know that, hey, clean this up. Otherwise, we're going to reject in the future. Please, clean up your recycling stream. So we call that a warning. They still collected it in the first week. Another unique thing here and cool about Cincinnati is they had high engagement from the hauler. Their hauler and their MRF is Rumpke, and Rumpke actually hired the inspection crew. And this is separate from their drivers, separate from MRF employees. This is a separate crew that goes out and inspects these recycling carts, but they were Rumpke employees. Looks like my slide might be getting cut off a little bit, but if you can see the bottom there, we did 5 inspections. They started at about 28% contamination rate and they ended at 20% contamination rate. So big results there as well. And Cincinnati 2.0. So we did it again, but we picked a new 11,000 households. These weren't the same households that were in round 1. We wanted a new subsection of households, and we wanted to test, what if we did less inspections? Do we really need to do 5? We saw great results with 5 inspections, but what happens if we get down to 3 inspections? 3 inspections clearly is less labor and less money. So what would happen if we went down to just 3 inspections? So that was our test. We also used in Cincinnati this education campaign as an opportunity to message on new accepted materials. During this time, their Rumpke MRF upgraded to be able to accept polypropylene in their mix. So we use this as an opportunity to educate residents that polypropylene can now be accepted in your recycling cart. Again, very high engagement and involvement from the hauler. And what did we see? Well, what we learned here is more inspections equals cleaner recycling. In the first round, we saw a relative 29% reduction in contamination with those 5 inspections. Well, within 3 inspections, we still saw results, but not as high. It was a 19% reduction in contamination. So lesson learned, more inspections equal cleaner recycling. All right, moving on to Columbus. Columbus tagging 1.0. Again, for inspections, almost 20,000 households. They did a warning and a rejection, just like Cincinnati. What they found is 1 out of 4 carts had a contamination issue. And so they really honed in on the number of carts that had contamination problems. And they saw that there was a 26% decline in the number of contaminated carts over the course of the project. And their main focus was plastic bags and bagged recycling. Those were their top 2 contaminants. And so they saw a 62% decline in bagged recycling and a 35% decline in plastic bags throughout the course of the project. Let me tell you what's cool about Columbus is we always talk to communities and say, how well do you know your audience? How do you know your residents? Well, in Columbus, in their target area, they were able to find out a whole lot about their target audience. They know their audience very well because they use the power of the data that was collected at the curb to really understand their audience. What I mean by that is they monitored their set out rate and their participation rate. And you'll see off to the right there, that they were able to tell how many people are using their cart over what period of time. So they saw that 70% of their residents were setting out at least once during this project period. And then the middle graph is what's in those carts. They use the power of the data collected at the curb to identify what percent of the material, what percent of the material is plastic bags, or what percent of the contaminants are to-go containers or bagged recycling. They were able to segregate all of the number of occurrences based on the contamination that they saw. And they took it a step further, which is really cool, creating behavior profiles. So they looked at their target area and they said, what percent of our community or this target area is good recyclers, meaning they have clean recycling every time they set it out? Or what percent of our population or target area are the learners? They've received a tag and then they corrected their behavior in the following weeks. Versus aspiring, which is a really nice way of saying they're not getting it. You know, we gave residents multiple tags. We're going to call them aspiring. We're optimistic that they could change, but they seem to need a lot more encouragement. And then you have the non-learners. Altogether, no matter how many tags they got, they continued to set out contamination. And then you had the quitters. And if you look at the quitters, that means I got a tag and I'm deciding I'm not going to participate in recycling. And that's a very small percent of their overall population. People are concerned if you start educating with warnings or rejections that ultimately your residents may stop setting out or participating in the program. And we find that that's a very small percent of the population. So way to go to Columbus using that data effectively. Gahanna, moving on to Gahanna. So Gahanna, it was 10,000 households. And what we wanted to try in Gahanna is varying tagging strategies. All right, so we had 4 different groups. We had a control group, and the control group just got a mailer, an info card. They didn't get any tagging occurrences. They just got a mailer in the mail. Test group number 1, we did an info card, and then we did 3 consecutive tagging occurrences. Instead of that 4, we went down to 3, similar to what Cincinnati tried. And then they took it a step further and said, all right, what if we just did 2 tagging occurrences, but 1 in the spring and 1 in the, let's see, we did 1 April 27th and 1 in June. So very spread out. They weren't consecutive. And then we did test group number 3 that got an info card and a top issue and 1 tagging occurrence. We're going to go through the city, do a spot check, see what happens. Put out a tag if they have contamination. Then they surveyed their residents, and OSU was heavily involved to analyze the data and help them set this up. Unfortunately, we don't have all the results in on each of those categories. What we do know is the sample sizes were quite small because there were so many different groups and pilots that we were trying. And spreading out tagging occurrences or taking a snapshot could be risky in looking at the results because it could be due to seasonality or time of year. So it's difficult to draw conclusions, but we're still analyzing the data. We know in Gahanna, though, that 73% were already model recyclers. We went out there and they were doing a good job already, but there's still a bit of confusion about what to put in the bin. And I love this. I don't know if you can all see the tag that was left in this cart here. This is an indication that residents want to do the right thing. So this resident got a tag the week before, and then they cleaned up their recycling cart and left a note for the inspectors. And it says, hey guys, I got it. I hope you have a great day ahead of you. So that's the kind of results we're hoping for. I'm going to cruise through these. So Fairfield, again, 4 inspections, 12,000 households, weekly collection. Rumpke, again, was the inspection crew here. What's cool about Fairfield is they had a fairly good starting point. 22% isn't that high compared to a lot of other programs, and they still saw a 45% reduction in contamination with the Feet on the Street program. So key takeaway here, it works even when you're starting from a fairly low contamination rate. And then in Centerville, we did 6 inspections, 2,000 households, weekly collection. What's cool here is 2 things. Master recyclers and Montgomery County Solid Waste District staff were the inspectors. And I really like engaging the community in that way. And so that was the inspection crew that they chose to hire. They saw 43% reduction, huge reduction in contamination. And so what's cool here is small communities can do big things too. So big results in Centerville. All right. So how does Ohio stack up? I put them all here in a bar chart to look at. The first 3 programs on this graph are actually Michigan communities that we just wrapped up. And what you see is the blue bar going upward is the contamination rate before the program started, and the green is after. And then the light blue bar going downward is the percent change in contamination. And so the first 3 programs off to the left are Michigan communities that we just wrapped up. Everything else is the Ohio ones I just described. And so the reason I circled the Columbus, Gahanna, and Cincinnati, because Gahanna has yet to have results here. Columbus, you'll see small results. This is about the inbound contamination rate, and I just want to call that one out. So in Columbus, we actually used 2 different methodologies to measure inbound contamination rate before and after. And so lesson learned here, keeping consistent methodologies when you're designing the measurement is really, really important. So I don't know that this necessarily depicts that Columbus didn't have great reduction results, but rather the way we measured it was not consistent before and after. And then I also pointed out Cincinnati 2.0, just because that's where we did those 3 inspections and kind of deviated away from our typical best management practices to see if we could still get results. Oh, thank goodness I can. Poll time. Dave, can we take a pause here and bring up our next poll? All right. What is the average recycling participation rate in your community, solid waste district, or authority? Less than 50% of your households are participating in your recycling program, between 50 and 75%, or you're doing really good, you're above 75% participation, or I have absolutely no idea how many people are setting up recycling.
Okay, here you go, Jill.
All right, thanks. 11% above 75%. That's great. 25%, and I have no idea. So that is the topic of the next slide. Let's move on. Is knowing your participation rate or understanding the data. Oops. All right. It's all about measurement, right? So we used a new app for all of our tagging projects that we did in 2.0. And so this app allowed us to measure our set out rate, so set out rate, meaning how many people set out on a given collection cycle. Participation rate, how many people set out within a 30-day period. That's how we define participation rate. Tagging rate, I kind of went into that earlier. What percent of the carts set out for recycling have a problem? Audit history, so we were able to see what that household did the week before. So we know the audit history. Each time we walk by that house, we know what happened the previous weeks. We're also able to measure the change in behavior. So in other words, if that resident got a tag, and did they continue to get tags or did they change their behavior? We also are able to create what we call portraits. And this is the Columbus Swaco data that I showed you earlier, where they call them behavior profiles. We call them portraits. And so we are able to look at each of the data sets and create these portraits, which I'll show you in just a minute. maybe I'll just dig right in. So that's what we're measuring with the app. And here's a snapshot of Cincinnati 2.0. The three, each row is a collection cycle. So we've got pass 1, 2, and 3. Our observation rate means we got through 92% of the households that we wanted to. We had a target area that we wanted to hit, but we got through 92% of those households. And that could be for a number of reasons. Our goal is always 100%, but it could be that someone called in sick, or the truck caught the inspection crew, or in this case, not in this case, but it could be a snowstorm or a hurricane or whatever it may be. So our goal is always to get through 100% of the households, but in this case, we got through 92% of them. What we found out is the set out rate on average on any given collection cycle is about 46%, and about 29% of the carts set out for recycling had an issue. And you'll see it started at 36% on week 1 and went down to 23% on that 3rd week. So that's what you want to see, the number of carts having an issue going down. And then we're able to see how many people set out, how many were clean, how many were contaminated, how many got a warning, how many got a rejection. So this is a dashboard that is live through that app, is uploaded on a regular basis daily as the inspection crew is going through. So here are the portraits. So we create 2 portraits, and what this means is we take that community and we determine, based on the data, how many people are setting out every single time they have an opportunity. So that's the bar on the left, a full set out, meaning every time there's a collection, they're setting out their recycling. High set out means more than 50% of the time they're setting out. Low set out means less than 50% of the time. And then you have the non-participants, or they never set out during this project. So now we can really divide up our community based on these portraits, so that when we do future education efforts, we know what we're looking at. So I can click on the set out non-participants, and I will have an address list of everyone that's not participating, because that's a message I want to design for non-participants to encourage them to start recycling, which is a completely different message than I'd want to send to the full set out part of my community. The full set out are your advocates. They don't need to be convinced to recycle. They just need to be reminded, maybe, or encouraged to share their knowledge and advocacy with their neighbors about recycling. So the messages are very different. And now we can target our message based on the portrait that we have within that community. We do the same for contamination. So here's a contamination portrait. Just because they set out every single week doesn't mean they're doing it properly. So now we have a model recycler, meaning every time they set out, it's clean recycling. Receptive means they've got a tag and they've cleaned up their behavior. Reluctant means, man, these are tough. They're repeat offenders. Every time I give them a tag, they're not really getting it. And then there's the non-participants. Again, another way to divide up your community so that you can target your message and use your educational funding more wisely. We also have charts on, what are we seeing in those carts? Pass after each pass, is it going down, and is it changing what we're seeing in those carts? And we can see it in pie chart form. And so, like I said, that's one metric, is all of the data collected at the curb with the app. But the other metric is a material sort before and after the program. And we use the GAP system called Waste Insights to measure before and after of what happened to the inbound contamination rate. Let me just do a quick snapshot. If you have not seen a sort before, we choose to sort it into 34 different categories. So this is a truck dumps. The recycling truck dumps on the tip floor of the MRF, and we have a sorting crew there taking random samples of the materials and sorting it into 34 different categories. And so it's all plugged into a database, and then we can figure out the percent of each of those materials coming into the recycling stream. Again, doing this before and after so we can measure the impacts. And then what we do, so So we not only look at the percent of material in the stream. So for example, we know in this case, we've got cardboard at 17.24%, but then we put a dollar value to that. Okay. So if cardboard is valued at, say, $200 a ton, we know we multiply that times what the percent of cardboard in that stream. So we can ultimately get what we call a blended material value. So what is a value of a ton of recycling that is being dropped off at the MRF? We call that the blended material value. And so we find that by doing the waste or the recycling audit and then putting a dollar value to each of those commodities. So I'm going to skip through this one really quick and go right to the fun stuff right here. So then we do a side-by-side comparison. So you'll see the blended value in this particular case was 55.08. That's before we started the campaign at all, before we did Feet on the Street, before we did any education. The value of this material was 55.08 a ton. Now keep in mind, this was back in 2019. And now after Feet on the Street, it went to $77.75 a ton. Again, the market value staying the same, the only thing changing was the composition of the material. So by driving contamination down and improving capture of the good stuff, we improve the blended value of that recycling stream. And I did the same thing in today's marketplace. So that was, the previous slide was 2 years ago. Now in today's marketplace, the value of recycling is much greater now. So in this case, before Feet on the Street, $200 a ton, and now it's $239 a ton. So improved value, $39 a ton. And this is just a quick snapshot. What does that mean on an annual basis? So in this case, this is a sample community. Looks like Fairfield. Their contamination rate went down 44%. Their blended value increased $22.67. So if you multiply that times their annual tonnage, we improved the total value of that recycling by $44,500. Of course, it costs something to put out a crew on the street to do this tagging program and the education and outreach, and we took that out. And so the net increase in this particular case or example was $21,000 annually. Now, this doesn't reflect the cost of processing or collection, and it doesn't reflect the savings at the MRF for the labor or reduced downtime. All those things that contamination causes at the MRF to slow the lines down, to clean out the screens. There's lots of issues with contamination at the MRF. This analysis doesn't include the benefits by reducing contamination, what happens at the MRF, besides the value of the material being dropped there. All right, so the good news is we took all of these successes and challenges. We worked with all these communities and we packaged them up and we said, what did we learn? What do we know works? And we put them into a toolkit. And so we have a step-by-step breakdown of how to conduct the Feet on the Street program. It's got 17 different tools. And what I mean by tools, it's got job descriptions on how you would hire someone. Where do we find people to do this kind of work? What are my choices for labor to do this type of thing? How do I talk to my MRF? What's the timeline? What's a budget like this look like? We have 17 different tools in this toolkit that has just been released for you to work through it and see if this might be a good fit for your community and how to conduct it. And with that being said, I think that's it. I'm turning it back over to Dave for questions, maybe.
Thank you, Jill. And that was great. And we appreciate all this excellent information and then you going through all the steps. We did have a few questions roll in, and I'll first address one. It was a general question about the video, when it'll be available. And the video is almost done. There's a few final approval steps we have to go through internally with the Ohio EPA. And when we have that completed, we will make sure we send you the link to everybody that attended. And we also have created a one-page fact sheet kind of summarizing it doesn't do the description justice that Jill gave today, but it kind of goes over a summary of the project, and it has a link to the toolkit, which is also a handout today, and they'll have a link to this presentation recording, and it'll also have a link to the video. So we'll make sure we get it out there, everybody that attended and beyond this, because the idea is to pass this around to other, people in your communities or other communities that are doing curbside programs. So I just want to make a comment on that. Jill, there's a few quick questions here. We'll see. Upper General, I answered it, but I thought I wanted to throw it off to you too to see is there's a couple people asked, like, can you explain what a MRF shed is? It's a fancy word I think we take for granted. If you wanted to kind of go there.
Good question. Okay. MRF shed, it's like a watershed. It's like what feeds the MRF. So if you're looking at a MRF shed, it's all of their customer base and where they're pulling materials from. So in Rumpke's case, it's every customer that brings material to that MRF. And what's cool about Rumpke is that when they tackle education, we like to encourage and work with MRFs to educate on a MRF shed approach to education, because whatever's funneling to their MRF should be the same educational message because they are accepting the same types of materials. So a MRF shed is really any radius or communities that are, or sources of material that are coming into that one MRF.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, that helps. There's another question. Again, I kind of answered it behind the scenes, but somebody asked, when adding recyclables to the recycling container, does items have to be bagged or separated? And I know in your experience, some places still like bag recyclables, but for most curbside drop-off rate, we don't want bag materials that adds to contamination, correct?
It's extremely rare for a community to, for a MRF to want bagged recycling prepared that way. And so if a community is still telling their residents to bag their recycling at the curb, you may want to check in with your MRF to ensure that that's still a good practice. My guess is they don't want it, but it's a change that you'd have to make within your community. So it's not an easy change. I've went through it, but we definitely had bagged recycling at our curb in the communities that I'm surrounded by, and we made a transition to carts. So I guess the question is, it's up to the local community and MRF, but 90% of MRFs will not take, or they charge more for bagged recycling.
Thank you, Jill. That's that. This is another question. I don't know if it might be more kind of big picture question, but have you had any luck convincing MRFs to honor your determined value per ton for the mixed materials? Kind of, I think it's reflected on your last couple slides there.
So how blended values come into play is really in the contract language between the MRF and the community. And so it may or may not be addressed in your contract with your MRF. If it's not, you definitely should, next time around, consider adding that language in there and how you're addressing the value of the materials. So many contracts would be that the MRF shares that value with the community, a portion of it. So you share in the risk and you share in the reward, both the community and the MRF. And if you want more on guidance on that, we have an incredible MRF guidance document designed for communities on the most important things to include in a MRF contract. You can find that on our website. It's really, really helpful to understand MRF contracting and how blended material values plays into that.
Great,
does that answer that question, Dave?
I think so, and we can. And the beauty of this is we can follow up more specifically too with these questions, and maybe we can follow up with a link to the MRF contract, because we've seen that contract. If anybody on this webinar went to the Recycling Partnership Conference back in October, that there was a whole presentation about MRF contracts and the importance of setting that up to make sure that there's two-way communication with the community and the MRF. So very, very important. Just like Jill said earlier, it's all about partnerships and communications. It's the same with your MRF contract. Next question. It's a good question. I know this is about curbside, but there's a good question about how would you translate this success to drop-off locations, which kind of a busy question. I don't know if you wanted to cover it briefly, and we might be able to follow up with this person too later on, more information, but wanted to address that really quick, Jill. It'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. So you're right. This project that I just described was all about feet on the street in a curbside collection program, but clearly contamination challenges exist in drop-off programs, and they have their own unique challenges. We did lots of work in Michigan. We're doing it now, and we've wrapped up many programs, and we're doing a lot more on drop-off quality improvement at drop-off locations. And so clearly there's a number of things to consider, including, the location, the infrastructure, signage, education, surveillance, cameras. There's lots of things to consider when it comes to quality improvement at drop-off locations. We do have a toolkit coming out specifically aimed at drop-offs that should be out shortly after the first of the year. A revised version of our toolkit that will focus on all the lessons we learned in Michigan as it relates to improving the quality at drop-off locations. I don't know if you want to speak more to that about Dave.
Well, I will say that we're in the early stages of looking, very early stages of seeing if, because originally when we created this project with the Recycle Partnership back in 2018, we heard from communities in Ohio, because we know Ohio has a large footprint of drop-off, recycling, and we heard what about drop-off recycling. So we are looking into that. If there could be something that can be done in Ohio, some other type of pilot, study or tagging project, and identifying that. There's a lot of moving parts of that because it's a little different than the curbside contamination, but we realize that's important, and we are actually looking to what's going on up in Michigan, which Jill has been involved in, and their results and kind of what worked and what didn't work to kind of help. But it's in early stages, so stay tuned for that one. Definitely, if we go down that path, you'll hear more about it. There's another good question. Actually, I was going to ask this, and somebody else beat me to it. Is like, and a tagging app. I'm assuming to talk about the tagging app you used for the 2.0, your new app. Be used by communities, or do solid waste management districts that want to do a tagging project, or that they want to do on their own? So I'll add to that question. Are there other options besides using that tagging app you developed? I know in the version 1.0, you guys did use a different tagging app, but if you could address that, is that something that would be available? I know I talked to you about earlier that may or may not be. You're still looking, but is that something that would be available to communities?
So right now it's available to communities that work with the Recycling Partnership on Feet on the Street. We're still determining how widespread we make that. So it's not released to everybody, but we do in the toolkit, that I have up on the screen here, there is something about measurement, which gives you other options. There's some Google Sheet applications that are rather easy to do. So we have options in our toolkit that describe how to measure without an app. And I'm hoping that soon we can share our app with the rest of the world. But right now it's for the grantees that we work with.
Thanks, Jill. And like I said, I will add that toolkit has great resources. It's only like 10, 11 pages long, but it has links in it, and that is also, like I said, a reminder. It is one of our 5 handouts, and it's like on the side if you go to your attendee interface, and it's contamination reduction kit.pdf. So if you want to check that out. Getting close here. There's some other good questions. Let's see here. You talked about the app. Like somebody commented on the graphics, has any community that of considered adding a graphic to the recycling cart that shows what can be accepted as a recycled material at their specific residence? Which I think, yes, we've seen it, but it again depends on the community, right? And the hauler and the MRF, right, Jill?
Yeah, is that question about images on the cart?
Yes, I believe it's about images like on the card, kind of like that are hot stamped or sticker.
So lots of communities do that, and we are actually working with many communities about the material changing, and then the sticker or the in mold label is no longer relevant, and it's extremely expensive to update that type of thing. So we tend to recommend just a generic recycling symbol and educate the exact material of what to put in it in other ways than a hot stamp or something on the cart. Because if there's a change, in fact, Grand Rapids is a perfect example where they accepted plastic bags, and now they no longer do accept plastic bags at the curb. And so to relabel, resticker, or re-lid all of those carts is just financially not feasible for them to do so. So they're in, a really tough spot because they don't have the funds to update that. So it's a very expensive endeavor if material mixes were to change, and they do. So we tend to recommend a generic, your logo, where to get more information, drive communities to a website or a phone number or something that they can get the updated information rather than putting it on there.
Okay, thanks, Jill. We're about 11, and there's a couple more questions. There's one, it's a good question, but I think I think I'm going to follow up because it was asking more about like the bottle bill in Michigan in place. Do you think that's going to change the complexion of recycling categories collected compared to Ohio? And any takeaways? That might be, I think it's a good question, but there might be an email or a little more thinking. But if you had any quick thoughts on that, just to the group.
Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily affect the contamination reduction numbers. If we're talking about how does contamination reduction numbers compare across states that have bottle bills or container deposit bills versus non, I don't think it affects the contamination reduction numbers, but it does affect the material mix clearly. So yeah, we still sort for the same 34 categories, but they look different. If you're looking at, say, aluminum cans and the percent that are in the stream in a container deposit state versus a non-container deposit state, but it doesn't necessarily affect contamination reduction efforts.
Okay. Well, thanks, Jill. And like I said, there's a couple more questions that are rolling in, and what we'll do is we'll collect them because, like I said in the beginning, and we will, some of them might be answered on our side of the house, but we will bounce off Jill and get her feedback. Because Jill has, I didn't read her bio, but she has many, many years of experience at working in a MRF. So she came from that side of the world, and now she's on the other side. And so she has a very interesting perspective and has a lot of experience. And of course, all our experience with the recycling partnership and dealing. So answer most of these questions, but we want to value her time because we're at 11 o'clock. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap things up. And thanks to Jill for your excellent presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending today's webinar. We thank you. We also want to thank our behind the scenes team. And there's a bunch of us here, and you know who you are, for making this webinar run so smoothly and making all our webinars run so smoothly. Finally, we want to let you know about some upcoming webinars that might be of interest to you and your organization. There's two that we have coming up. There's on November 18th, FIGHT, Ohio EPA's Mosquito Control Grant Application Overview. This webinar provides a brief overview of the Ohio EPA's Mosquito Control Grant and information how to apply for the upcoming grant cycle. There might be a few of you on here that are associated with health departments or work with health departments where this might be of interest to you. And then finally, we mentioned, this contamination, recycling contamination category, the new project category under our grant cycle. And we had a grant webinar, first kickoff grant webinar last week, and we plan to run basically the same webinar again on January 6, 2022, and maybe a couple of modifications based on what feedback we get from the first webinar. And it basically goes over the grant application process, who's eligible, funding opportunities, like who can apply, kind of go through the steps of putting an application together on the online grant portal. Those are some of the deadlines and all that good information you need. We made this because we realized most people don't start putting in a grant project together until about a month left in our grant cycle. And our grant application cycle closes on February 4th. So look for more information about that January 6th webinar. And again, to register these, you can go to our epa.ohio.gov/DEFA page, DEFA, and click on a training tab, and you will be able to register for all upcoming training and look at past webinar recordings. And with that, we will end today's webinar. And again, I want to thank Jill and everybody for attending, and thank you for joining us. And have a great day.